Yeah, thanks very much, and it's a real honour to be here today. And please continue with your meals, and hopefully we can provide you a bit of information and possibly entertainment. So, look, I'm here to talk about all things rice. Should rice be grown in Australia? We are the last of the single desks, as you just heard, and what does the future hold? So, the Australian rice industry arose from the new irrigation areas in 1925 to become the dominant irrigated crop in southern New South Wales. And production actually peaked at 1.7 million tonne in 2001. At the height of the millennium drought, less than a decade later, production had slumped to 19,000 tonne. After returning to a series of large crops, rice growers have produced a mere 50,000 tonne this year in the face of minimal irrigation entitlements. So rice growing continues to be blamed for the woes of the Murray-Darling Basin, even though water usage on rice this season was barely 1% of total diversions. So a good question, should we be growing rice in Australia? Generally people are referring to rice production in the Murray-Darling Basin, but I'll address the rice production in northern Australia a little later. So just a brief history of rice, and I won't labour it, but after a series of droughts in the early 1900s, the Murrumbidgee irrigation area was launched to green the inland and drought-proof Australia. So by the early 1920s, the Murrumbidgee irrigation area was painted publicly as a colossal waste of public money. Horticulture wasn't paying, the Leeton cannery was in trouble, settlers were sinking into hopeless debt and leaving the area. And so the Water Commission and Irrigation Council sent a fellow called Jack Brady to California in 1920, and he ordered 300 pounds of seed from the Pacific Rice Growers Association in Sacramento. There were trials held in 1923 and they were a big success, leading to 222 tonnes produced in 1925. That grew to 16,000 tonne in 1928, and all of a sudden the irrigators in the Murrumbidgee irrigation had some disposable income, so it made a huge impact on that area. In the same year, the Rice Marketing Board became the first statutory authority formed out of the Marketing of Primary Products Act. More about this later when I consider rice as the last single desk in Australia. In response to manipulation by private millers, the Rice Growers Association members of Australia formed the Rice Growers Cooperative Mills in 1950, and return to growers increased to £30 a tonne from a mere £10 a tonne. So this is one of the reasons that rice growers are very passionate about grower control to this very day. SunRice focused on export markets and branded product, developing significant markets in Papua New Guinea, Asia and the Middle East. SunRice converted to a company in 2005 to establish a permanent capital base. So we moved from a cooperative to a company. With our dual class share structure, it was created and limited voting rights B shares were listed on the National Stock Exchange before listing on the ASX last April with unrestricted access of B class shares for investors. I'd like to touch just briefly on our environmental record because that's something that's sometimes pointed at us. One of the reasons I love to grow rice is the wildlife habitat that I create with each crop. This year I grew a 100 hectare crop and it was a very lonely crop. I was about the only one in 40 kilometres, but anyway, that's another story. And so the 100 hectare crop provided a refuge for over 1,000 birds. So every time I'd be there, at least 1,000 birds there. Also about 100 snakes, I'd say, so absolutely infested with snakes, but I like most snakes. They're good. So along with that we had kangaroos, emus, wild pigs, cats, foxes, also red deer, and they weren't welcome. But along with that my little granddaughters, who definitely are welcome, in the water, they love it. So it's a great thing about country girls, and they just love the bush. So I had a couple of eastern bitterns in residence, and they're amongst the rarest birds, water birds in the world. So last year I also had the most successful southern bellfrog project, and they're the second most endangered Australian frog after the corroboree frog. So there was great excitement when the visiting ecologists came and had a look and found a multitude of tadpoles in the area. So you'll note from the accompanying photos that they are a very fine looking frog, and I do enjoy seeing them. They're quite common. So this is a habitat that rice can't, no other crop but rice can provide. So look, I've called this section Prospering in the Face of Diversity, and I'll explain a little more. So the potentially disastrous collapse in production caused by the drought, the big millennium drought, to 2% of normal in 2008 would likely have been fatal to most other Australian industries. But what it did do, it resulted in us refocusing the whole of the SunRice business. SunRice quickly developed its sourcing capabilities to protect hard-won international markets. SunRice acquired a mill in the Sacramento Valley that continues to this day as Sun Foods, and we've recently opened a mill in Vietnam. We also accelerated our research and development to improve water use efficiency in the Riverina. So with yield rate, we rose those from 6 tonne per hectare in the 1970s to 11 tonne per hectare today. And the world average for rice production is 4 tonne per hectare. Water use efficiency, we rose that from 500 kilograms of paddy per megalitre of water, that's 1 million litres, to 950 kilograms per megalitre over the same times. And this is 50% less than the global average. By any measure, we are an extremely efficient producer of rice. And the International Rice Research Institute, based in the Philippines, considers us to be the world leaders. So SunRice develops specialty varieties for targeted markets around the world, with revenue exceeding $1 billion from sales to over 50 countries. The SunRice Group has also diversified its earnings with our CopRice stock feed business and Riverina gourmet foods business. And if you see on your table, you'll see some of our Rose's Chutney, which was one of our newer small companies, and you'll also see one of our super grain rice cups. So what I'd now like to consider is water reform, competing crops, and the rise of horticulture. In simple terms, the water reform process was meant to achieve the separation of land and water to allow water to move to its highest value use, and I think that's very important to focus on that, its highest value use, with enhancing trade of water entitlements and allocation. The return of water from the irrigation sector to environmental flows was based on property rights, with government holding environmental water in its own rights. At the time, a small component of that was meant to be buybacks. This became a massive component of it when governments worked out that it was much easier to just go and acquire entitlements rather than invest in efficiency programs, which was the initial intent. And at the time, I was involved in discussions as the head of the NFF Water Task Force with Malcolm Turnbull at the time, and that was very much the point. We were going to retain the property rights and the yields for individual irrigators. Another feature was the coordination of the Murray-Darling Basin by the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, and that was an advance on the old Murray-Darling Basin Commission. So that they wanted to have a more integrated approach and less impact from individual states. The result was a dramatic shift from annual cropping to permanent plantings. Now, if you can have a look at that slide now, you'll see there we have in the light green areas, and I'll just have a look there for you. So we have there those pale green areas. They're all the new plantings around that. And if you have a look here, you've got up here Mildura, Robinvale, these areas here, and you'll see there's been a massive increase of those plantings from 17,000 hectares to 75,000 hectares. So one of the issues around that is when you look at the basin, to move water from that end of the river, from up where we traditionally have irrigated, requires about 1.5 to 2 megalitres. So if you use 1 megalitre up in the upper reaches of the river, to do the same thing in the lower reaches of the river takes about 1.5 to 2 megalitres. Now, we currently have a standard rate. So this is something that is going to be addressed, I believe. They're going to discuss that at the next COAG meeting in June. So we also looked at the increasing allocation prices as these new developments were built. They were not underpinned by high security water because the original planners of our irrigation system realised that with the ephemeral nature of our streams, that they're very inconsistent, that no more than about 20% in their plans should be permanent plantings. And to that point, when Murray Irrigation was established in 1940, they had no permanent plantings there at all. It was meant to be a general security, so when you have a drought, you reduce your irrigation use, and so that was very much in the planning. And one of the real issues around this high security water I've mentioned, in the last 3 years the water price has gone from 2,000 megalitres for an entitlement. So an entitlement means you are able to generate annually one entitlement, 1 megalitre of water. That's gone from $2,000 a megalitre to $6,000 a megalitre. So what's happening now is people are just they're developing a program and they're just using the annual water markets to do that. So established irrigation areas have been targeted for buybacks, with 28% now of all the southern connected water entitlements are now owned by the environment. Traditional rice growing areas like New South Wales Murray have been targeted with buybacks. And for example, what I mean by that is to do an efficiency program, you could go down, if you were doing it in sort of Murrumbidgee or in Victoria, you could go to Murray Irrigation and buy an entitlement there and give that to the government and do the efficiency program in your own district. So there's been a very marked movement of water out of the traditional areas. This dramatic squeezing of the market has pushed annual trade to heights that are not economic for annual cropping. And even the horticulturalists like the Almond Board of Australia just last week have called for radical action, including a moratorium on any further greenfield developments and also major reform of water markets. The Murray Irrigation area, which is one of our traditional areas, is well suited to the irregularities of southern Australian stream flows, with its focus on annual cropping, livestock production, and rice is particularly suited to this mix. This is why, when formed in the 1940s, as I mentioned, there was no high security water planned in those areas. I believe we've passed the threshold, and the continued unsustainable expansion of permanent plantings will produce a crash caused by the next significant drought or international commodity oversupply. And to give you an example, we have our mill in Sacramento, and the plantings of almonds and nuts there is quite phenomenal. And to give you an example, in Modesto below Sacramento, that used to be the home of lot feeding of dairy cattle and the lot feeding dairy industry there. That's closing down, and it's all being replaced by plantings of nuts. So you know what commodities are like, but hopefully we don't see that crash. But so the issue then is that highly profitable annual irrigation enterprises and industries may be casualties leading up to the event unless action is taken now. And from your point of view as taxpayers, and they're usually people that end up where it lands, you'll probably be required to finance an emergency horticultural scheme similar to those like the old tree pull schemes from horticulture, or the pulling out the wrong variety of vines. Now, to quote the Almond Board, and I think this is very important, so this isn't one irrigation area industry versus another. You know, it's really starting to become very clear. And they announced last week, all irrigated industries are mutually interdependent. They support each other's sustainability through the use and trade of water. Fixed horticultural plantings rely on annual croppers and dairy with flexibility to trade their waters in dry season. In short, Riverina rice is well suited to the irregularities of the southern Australian stream flows. Now let's consider the last of the single desks. We are the last industry in Australia to have statutory marketing, although this only applies to the control over rice exports from New South Wales. It's been an important factor in the growth and continuing success of the rice industry, and this is because the single desk has allowed the rice industry to prosper in world's corrupted and highly regulated rice markets. And a good example of this is with the massive rice-eating country of Indonesia above us. All imports of rice into Indonesia are controlled by Bulog, that's their government buying agency, and we have absolutely no access to that market. Another example is Japanese import control. So we pay tariffs of up to $2,000 a tonne to get our rice into there. We still actually export rice, so the 1,000 tonne I grew this year actually will probably end up in Japan in sushi restaurants, and with EU tariffs. So for example, in the I think we get about 3,000 tonne into Europe before we're hit with a $1,000 a tonne tariff. Now, at the same time, Australian consumers enjoy one of the most competitive rice markets in the world. We have no tariffs. Anybody from anywhere can export rice to here. No tariff at all, and we're quite happy with that. We will survive on our own merits. We're cut out of nearly every free trade agreement on the basis that rice is a sensitive product. So all the free trade arrangements you've seen with Korea, Japan, etc., we're immediately cut out. We're one of the chips that are dealt out. The one exception has been Peru, where we don't export rice to Peru. So anyway, we got that one. Unlike the USA, where competing millers drive rice prices down, our single desk allows us to deal with some of these state buying enterprises and gain the best price in tender situations. It's been a very significant part in us as a sub-scale industry having the success we've had. So on this basis, we believe the single desk has been uniquely successful for growers and consumers in New South Wales. The arrangement is regularly reviewed, with the next one due later this year. Long may it continue. So I'd like now to talk about rice growing and climate change. The world climate continues to change, and I have no doubt that extensive use of fossil fuels is accelerating these changes. Australian farmers have been wrestling with climate variability, and I use that term very clearly, so variability, for 150 years, and rice growers are dealing with it right now. SunRice's strategy of multiple supply chains around the world has enabled us to deal with climate variability faced by the Riverina over the last 20 years, and it's interesting, none of our 1,500 growers have ever said to me, why are we doing this, why are we doing these things in Vietnam, the USA? They understand that with the card we've been dealt with variability, we've got to do that to make sure that we can keep our premium markets for when they're able to grow rice. So we have production facilities in California, Vietnam, Papua New Guinea, Riverina and Brandon in northern Queensland, and markets in over 50 countries around the world. So SunRice is well positioned to deal with climate change. Now, on a personal note, I spent a couple of years growing rice on the Ord River during the Millennium Drought. I must admit, I was standing in the middle of about 3,000 acres of irrigation land. I was absolutely bored. We had no water for about 4 years. So I decided I'd go on a little bit of an adventure, and the photos see that what we did. So went on a small drive. It's 4,100 kilometres through about 3 customs check stations to make sure the machinery was clear. Then we started to, we set up along the Ord. This is along the Ord River there. We landformed country there. I took that up there as well. And then we sowed the crop. And it's quite dramatic, country when you have a look at it. And we had a nice, successful establishment. And it was an absolute pleasure to do it. So then there's the beautiful background. Crop grew. And then the first crop, so quite amazingly, it took 98 days to go from just a planted crop. We planted it 98 days later, and unlike the 140 days here, it was ready to harvest. So it was a nice heavy crop. We harvested the crop, and that photo there, Andrew, we sent that to the land, and that was the front page there at one stage on the land about 8 years ago. So then we proceeded to harvest the crop. That was very good. And we averaged about 8 tonne. And if you have a look at that photo there, you can see all the construction there. So that's stage 3. So that was Leighton's, laying out all the canals and alongside that the rice crop there. So all that out to this became stage 3. So the next year we planted again, and as you can see, it was a very nice crop, great crop. And then unfortunately, you can see that's rice blast. So rice blast is one down from foot and mouth. So when you get that sort of a disease, the governments become involved. So we had an interstate collection of agricultural representatives, and they put a curfew on the whole crop. They quarantined it for a month, and they were deciding what they're going to do about this outbreak of rice blast. And in the end, they said, well, we'll just let them deal with it. So anyway, that happened. And the interesting thing is that was where the rice blast was discovered, was 50 yards from where they found sugar smut, which destroyed the sugar industry up there. So anyway, so we look, every ill wind has some good, and at the same time the Labor Party decided to suspend all exports of live cattle out of the Kimberleys. They had all these cattle in feedlots, so what to do with that rice crop? So somebody came and said, would you like to cut that for hay? And I said, I would love to cut that for hay. So we cut it for hay, baled up, fed it to cows, and then I scurried home with my tail between my legs. So that was our last crop there. So the point being is that you can grow rice in the north, and it's highly successful, but with high costs, new diseases and pests, they're a challenge. Water's incredibly cheap, so if you look at Lake Argyle, it's three times the size of the Hume, and it uses less than 3% of its water on irrigation today. So in the next century, looming issues around food security will take agriculture north in a serious way, and the Australian rice industry is well positioned to lead the way, and rice loves a hot summer. So I'd like to move on now to SunRice's journey to the ASX and our 5-year plan. So as you may know, SunRice listed on the ASX last month with the ticker SGLLV. The LV refers to the fact that the B-class shares we have listed have limited voting rights. A-class shares can only be held by active rice growers, and they have the right to vote on constitutional change, director appointments, and of our 11-person board, 7 of the directors are rice growers. The change of the constitution enabled SunRice to list on the ASX required 75% from both our A and B class shareholders, which was resoundingly achieved. Some of our older growers thought it was the beginning of the end, and it was but we did get very strong support. We got over 80% support for it. We're hopeful that the outstanding performance of B class shares over the past 12 months on the National Stock Exchange, during which time the share price increased from about $2 to $6, will be replicated on the ASX over time. So the move to the ASX is aimed to improve SunRice's ability to raise capital, allowing the company to take advantage of the investor appetite for global FMCG, fast-moving consumer goods companies and agribusiness stocks. And SunRice is a bit of a combination of the two, without making any fundamental changes to the structure of A-class grower shareholder control. And that's something our growers really believe passionately in, that they actually get to control their destiny as growers. We have an exciting 5-year strategic plan for SunRice that aims to ensure high returns for Riverina growers in the future, broaden our presence into new international markets and expand our existing presence in high-returning markets, thereby reducing our reliance on a couple of key consumer markets, and Papua New Guinea is one of those. We want to address the challenges we face in servicing our international markets due to the volatility of the size of the Australian rice crop. Now, this busy slide describes on one sheet how SunRice is going to navigate the next 5 years. But just very in general terms, the continue to position Australian rice as a premium product, which we do very successful. We'll leverage our reputation for food safety and clean, green agricultural product. One of the things we find our consumers around the world, they want to trust where their rice comes from. And we're at the stage now, within a year or so, we'll be able to show them on the pack, if they scan a pack, which paddock in the Riverina or in Vietnam, where that rice has come from. And that's very important to our consumers. And we want to continue to exploit evolving global food trends like the ever-increasing popularity of Japanese cuisine through our sushi rice, and a keener focus on health issues through our low GI rice. So that's looming issues around health for our consumers is very important. So in conclusion, like all Australian global fast-moving consumer good businesses with a strong agricultural foundation, we have our challenges, and the drought is not the least of them. However, we also have some very significant advantages. We have a strong branded presence in many of the world's premium markets, combined with a second-to-none ability to source rice from anywhere on the globe, particularly from the magnificent Riverina rice farms. Indeed, the Australian rice industry should be held out as a model for the rest of Australian agribusiness. We're innovative, sustainable and research-driven. We are not a commodity trader, but rather undertake value-adding of our rice through processing and packaging facilities in regional Australia. not in the cities, providing employment and a strong pride in our rural heritage, and we remain Australian-owned. Whatever the challenge, I'm confident that SunRice will prevail to the benefit of our shareholders, growers, employees and consumers. Thank you.